Hey, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're jumping into the really fascinating world of contracts. Look, we all make promises every single day, right? But what's that special formula, that magic ingredient that turns a simple promise into something the law will actually enforce? Well, let's find out.
Really think about it for a second. You might promise a friend you'll grab coffee later, or you might click that I agree button on some new software. One of those is just a casual plan, but the other? That's a serious legal commitment. So, what's the difference? What separates the two? We're about to follow the entire life of a contract, from just a tiny idea all the way to a legally binding deal.
So, where does a contract even begin? Well, it all starts with this crucial and honestly often invisible element, intent. Before anyone makes an offer, before any money changes hands, the law asks one really fundamental question. So, how in the world does the law figure out what someone was intending? Well, it's not trying to read minds, that's for sure. Instead, it uses what's called a simple objective test. Basically, it asks, what would a normal, reasonable person think was intended in this situation? And this is so key because not every casual chat is meant to end up in a courtroom. The context of a promise, it matters a lot. And yeah, that context creates two totally different starting points. You see, in social or family situations, the law just assumes you don't plan on suing each other over a broken promise. But in the business world, oh, that assumption is flipped completely. Every single deal is presumed to have legal teeth. There's this famous case from way back in 1919 that really hammered this idea home. So you have Mr. Balfour, a civil servant working abroad. His wife had to stay behind in England for health reasons, and he promised to send her a monthly allowance. Well, later on, they separated, he stopped paying, and she sued him. But the court actually dismissed her case, ruling this was just a purely domestic arrangement, not a formal contract. And here is the absolute key takeaway from the judge in that case, Lord Atkin. He basically said that promises made within a marriage are built on trust and affection, not the cold, hard logic of the law. And that powerful statement really cemented this idea that the home is generally a totally separate world from the marketplace of contracts. Okay, so once we've established that there's serious intent, what's next? Well, that intention has to be expressed clearly. And this brings us to the formal start of any contract, the proposal, or, what most of us just call an offer. So what exactly is an offer in the eyes of the law? To put it simply, it's a clear signal from one person to another saying, hey, I'm ready to be bound by a deal right here, right now. It's not just some vague idea. It's a final, concrete expression of willingness. But here's where a lot of people get tripped up. Not everything that looks like an offer is one. A real proposal is basically a take-it-or-leave-it deal. But things like, say, a price tag in a shop or a restaurant menu, those are just invitations to propose. The business is inviting you to make them an offer to buy their stuff. Let's just walk through how that works in a store. That item on the shelf with a price tag, that's the invitation. When you take it to the counter, you are making the proposal to buy it. And the cashier taking your payment, that's the final acceptance that seals the deal. It's this simple structure that protects the store from, say, having to sell an item they just ran out of. Pretty neat, right? Okay, so we've got intent and we've got an offer. But believe it or not, that's still not enough. A promise needs one more vital ingredient to become a contract, something the law calls consideration, which is really just a fancy way of saying the price of the promise. The law actually has this fantastic Latin term for a promise that's missing this ingredient, nudum pactum, which literally means a naked promise. A naked promise is totally unenforceable because nothing has been given in return for it. So this is where consideration comes in to, clothe the promise and give it some legal force. So what is consideration really? Well, it's the value that each person brings to the table. It could be money, sure, but it could also be goods, a service, or even a promise not to do something. And it doesn't have to be fair. You can legally agree to sell a car worth thousands for just a few bucks, but it has to have some value in the eyes of the law. It's the proof that this isn't just a one-sided gift, but a real two-way bargain. And consideration isn't just about what's happening this very second. It can be past, like a promise to pay for a favor you already asked someone to do. It can be present, which is when the promise and the action happen at the same time. And it can be future, which is just a simple exchange of promises to do things for each other later on. So we've seen how a contract is born. But what happens at the end of its life, especially when things go wrong? Let's take a look at how contracts can crumble. All right, the most common way for a contract to end on bad terms is through a breach. A breach is just when someone fails to do what they promised to do and they don't have a good legal reason for it. This failure gives the other person the right to go seek a legal remedy.
But what if not doing your part isn't really anyone's fault? This brings us to this legal idea called frustration or impossibility. The classic case here is Taylor v. Caldwell. The parties had a contract to use a music hall for a bunch of concerts. But before the very first concert, the hall burned to the ground. The court said the contract was void because its entire subject matter was just gone, making it physically impossible to perform.
So if a contract is breached, what happens next? Well, the most common remedy isn't forcing someone to do what they promised. It's usually about paying for the damage that was caused. And here's a really important point about damages. The goal isn't to punish anyone. It's about compensation. The whole point is to financially restore the innocent person to the position they would have been in if the contract had never been broken in the first place. And damages aren't a one-size-fits-all thing. They come in two main flavors. General damages cover losses that would naturally, obviously flow from the breach. But special damages, those cover unusual losses. And you can only claim those if you specifically warned the other party about your unique circumstances way back when the deal was made. And that brings us to the end of our explainer. We've seen that for a promise to actually become law, it needs real intent, a clear proposal, and consideration from both sides. It kind of makes you think, doesn't it? As you go about your day, which of the agreements you make, big or small, are actually built on that solid foundation of contract law? Thanks for joining me.